Welcome to Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com. I'm your host, Shannon Skinner. I've got a great show lined up for you today. In the first half hour, I'll be speaking with Karen Wright, an executive coach and the founder of the Accidental Alpha community. Intrigued? And later in the segment, before we take a break, I'll have my regular Good to Know Minute when I ask my guests for their top tip on creating a successful life, and you'll hear Karen's. And in the second half of the show, we'll be talking about Feng Shui with expert Tila Silverio, so stay tuned. Karen, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Now, we're here to talk about the Accidental Alpha, and you're an executive coach, and you have been for a few years. You left a successful career in a Fortune 500 company to become an executive coach. Why the transition?
Well, I found myself at a point of inflection in that career. I'd been moved out of the country, and a number of things about that move didn't go as planned. And after about 8 months or so in this sort of what was supposed to be a big opportunity, I said, I don't really think it's working out. And so I opted out and came back to Toronto and started looking at what I would do going forward. And I looked at my career to that point, which was in marketing, and I started to understand that it had always been a fascination with human behavior that had really sort of inspired me and driven me. And as I was trying to figure out what one does with that sort of interest, I happened across an article on this new thing that was just beginning in the States, and it was called coaching. And it really sounded quite interesting. It was working with people to create their best life and to achieve their goals and to fulfill their dreams. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty fun. And it really didn't exist in Canada at the time. So I decided to take a course and see what happened, and I've never looked back. The moment I started talking about it, those who understood it were very, very interested in working with me, and I built a corporate clientele over time because that was my background. And here I am, 16 years later.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And so you moved back to Toronto, so you're based here.
That's right, yes.
And through this process of coaching your clients, you discovered a trend, an interesting trend.
Well, I discovered it, I think I understood it as a trend once I saw what was happening in my own life and started connecting with clients who were experiencing something similar. So it really did start with what I was noticing for myself. And it took me a while to understand that what I was experiencing wasn't mine alone, that others were in the same situation.
And this is the Accidental Alpha trend.
Yes, that's the name that I've given to what's called a breadwinner wife, I guess, in some circles. Although many of us say breadwinner, there's got to be a better word. But the idea of a woman who is responsible for the financial security of their household. It's a role reversal in traditional terms, although it's more and more evident these days. It is something that's growing. But yes, the idea of the accidental alpha is the woman who has had to step into that breadwinner role, although it wasn't part of the master plan originally. It wasn't what they signed up for.
So, so you founded the Accidental Alpha community, which, and I have to say, I do love, I love the branding, I love the term, because it says so much. I stumbled upon being an alpha.
Yeah. Well, truly, it's not that it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's just that it wasn't what we had planned. And so if I take myself as an example, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I have 2 great kids, and I always saw myself as a partner, but I never envisioned that I would be the one really, creating all of the financial security. And that's a fairly recent phenomenon for me. And so reconciling that with my original vision of how my life would look and preparing myself to handle that kind of responsibility. And it's quite a shift from what I envisioned. And I felt really uncomfortable about being bothered by that. I thought for a long time, well, I should just be okay with that. I should just step up and be comfortable and be happy that I can do something that pays me so well I can take care of a whole family. But there's always this undercurrent of discomfort and anxiety around it. And I was reluctant for a long time to talk about it, but as soon as I did, I discovered that there are many, many, many women out there experiencing exactly the same thing.
And what was the forum that you discovered where women really started opening up to you?
Well, the first thing I did, I'm surrounded by coaches. With what I do for a living, all of my friends are brilliant. And they ask great questions. And I was attending a teleconference that was a friend of mine named Laura Berman-Fortgang was giving a session, and she was talking to a bunch of people, and one of the questions she asked, and it was all about how to create the next phase of your life, and her words were, what are you willing to stop suffering for in the spirit of serving others? And I thought, maybe there is something positive I can do with this anxiety and this discomfort and these questions that I have. And I started talking about it really tentatively with some clients who I knew were having some concerns and issues in their own relationships. And every time I talked to a woman about it, they either said, oh my gosh, that's me, and I feel so badly that I'm struggling, but that is who I am. And then what I decided to do was post a question on a LinkedIn group. It was the Women's Executive Network LinkedIn group. And I posted a question, and it was, women as primary breadwinner. I'm noticing this with my clients. I'm experiencing it in my own life. Are any of you out there noticing this trend? And in a matter of minutes, there were dozens of comments. So it was clearly something that struck a chord.
Now, what kind of comments were you getting? Were you getting was it sort of generally positive, or were you getting women who felt resentful, or they didn't have anyone to talk to? Thank God there's somebody here that has an understanding of what I'm going through and the issues I'm dealing with. What was that sort of initial response like?
Well, Shannon, really there was some of everything, all of the above. So one of the first comments was a woman who said, this was my story in my first marriage, and here's what I should have done differently. Here's what I learned from it. That marriage has since ended, but I sure know how to prevent some of those mistakes going forward. There are others who were saying, we're working on it, and we're struggling, but we're very committed to working on it, and I would just really love to talk about this with other women because I really felt very alone. And there were others who were very resentful and who were just so angry at their spouse for putting them in this situation and for not contributing. And so there's some real anger and frustration built up in some corners. So really some of everything.
I mean, I can understand, it's great to be able to, in any relationship, to be able to say, yeah, I can, financially support us. But why would women feel resentful? I mean, what is that underlying reason for the resentment? Is it taking away time from kids? Do they feel like they're putting their spouse in a bad position? I mean, what kind of sense do you get?
Well, I know in my own situation, I miss some of the mom things. And so I've always worked all through the time since I had kids. My kids are 10 and 12. And my husband had a very successful business. And it used to be that I would arrange my business around my kids' schedule. And that really worked for me because I got to drop them at school and pick them up and do all the mom things that I like to do. And I miss some of that now. And that bothers me because I really feel like, well, that's kind of the really important stuff. So there's a little bit of that. Sometimes, some women make their choice of spouse in part based on protection and security and being taken care of. And so for some, they feel like that protection and security has been taken away or at least changed. And so they're struggling with how to reconcile that. And I think it's important to differentiate between the accidental alpha and the intentional one, because there are women who really have always intended to soar and do big things, and who got together with the person that they're with, whether it's spouse or whatever, that on the basis of that being the configuration of the relationship, and everyone's been okay with it from the beginning. So the accidental alpha is one for whom this is a bit of a change in plan, and that's where the struggle and the anxiety and the need to reconcile comes in.
Well, some people would say that traditionally women feel there's some innate need to feel that they'll be taken care of, whether it be by a male or whomever. But some have said, there is an innate need for women to feel that women feel that they desire that sort of security. But that's not always the case.
Well, I think we'd all like that, and the degree to which we need it probably varies by woman. And I know that you can look at the basic nurturing instinct and go back to the sort of caveman hunter-gatherer model and say, well, the man's supposed to go and hunt and gather, and the woman's supposed to take care of the home fires. And as women become more educated and have more opportunities in the business world and create more opportunities for ourselves in the business world, I mean, both you and I run our own businesses, so we've created our opportunities.
It feels great.
It does feel great. It's fantastic.
It's empowering.
It is. And it means that we're fully able to contribute on so many levels. But I think that there still is also something that's deeply embedded that says, but I like being taken care of to some degree. Now, I think that our increasing independence means that very few of us would ever say we want to totally rely on the support of someone else. And in fact, there are books written about the fact that women should never actually be fully reliant on somebody else, because there's a lot of risk attached to that. But somewhere in the middle seems to be a slightly more comfortable place in terms of sharing and kind of co-owning the responsibility. But for some women, I think the responsibility and what that is needs to be defined as something larger than just the money. I think that would be probably a good step. To a certain degree, we're a product of our generation, in that this man earning, woman tending home fires is a little bit of a traditional model that maybe we're generationally kind of moving through.
So with the men, through your experience now, the men who are staying home, taking care of the kids, or maybe they don't have kids, maybe they have a part-time job and they're operating out of their home, so they're doing the cooking and cleaning while they're there. How are they feeling resentful?
It depends on the man. So the one thing that I have discovered through my conversations with all of these women who've been chatting in this discussion forum I've created, clarity of purpose from the man's perspective is a really important ingredient. If the man is feeling somehow inadequate or aimless or frustrated, that's going to take its toll in the relationship. So, the woman, we are the people, mama bear, we take care of our kids and our family. We'll go out there and do whatever's necessary. Men are wired a little bit differently in terms of a need for accomplishment, and they have to redefine that accomplishment clearly for themselves in order to feel good about themselves. And some men who stay home see accomplishment in terms of taking care of kids and taking care of home and taking care of meals. And if that's what they've chosen and fully stepped into, then they can really feel great about that, and that satisfies that need for accomplishment. But if the man is still in that kind of limbo place between, well, I'm taking care of this, but I really want to be doing something else, then that's, I think, where some challenges arise.
And generally across the board, men tend to put their self-worth into work and finance. Women tend, and in the mental area or intellectual area of life, and women will tend to put their self-worth into the physical area of life, health and beauty and social, their friends. So I could imagine that if a man loses his job, it impacts his finances, it impacts his self-worth. So then if he is at home and he sees his wife thriving and she's loving what she's doing, it might, you could see where it could cause some tenderness, some tender feelings.
Well, I think what you've described is a very traditional definition of self-worth in each case. And the progressive model says if we are in a relationship, then we really co-own everything about our life, and each will play a role. And so the couples that really are making this work are couples who've said, we are in this together, whatever it takes. So right now I'm earning the money and you're taking care of the home, and that's great because everything is taken care of. And if we can each find our identity in that, then we can be successful. But it really has to be an understanding that each part is equal, even if it's different.
And now the Accidental Alpha, the community, maybe you can quickly just describe what it does, and we'll talk about it after we take a break. But
it's a website that I created really just to give this community a place, and it's just starting to grow. But it's just something that, when I saw the response in the discussion groups, and I looked around a few other places online to see kind of who was talking about this and writing about it, it just seemed like there wasn't really one place where these women could come and chat and connect. And so really that's the purpose of the Accidental Alpha website, is just to create that community.
And the URL is
www.accidentalalpha.com.
accidentalalpha.com.
Yes.
Now we're about to take a break, which means that we have our Good to Know Minute, where I invite my guests to give their top tip on creating a successful life, and I know that you have a top tip for our viewers.
I do. Mine is to choose happiness.
And because?
Because happiness is a choice. So there's an entire field of study that's been emerging in the last few years called positive psychology. And the premise of positive psychology is that happiness is a choice, that optimists lead happier lives than pessimists, but optimism isn't about blindly being bubbly. It's about handling problems and believing that you've got the resilience to deal with those problems and knowing that you're in control. And so choosing happiness is absolutely a possible choice to make.
Well, thank you. Well, we're going to take a break and we'll be back. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women. I'm Shannon Skinner, and I'm here speaking with Karen Wright. We're talking about the accidental alpha and also executive coaching. Now, further to your tip on choose happiness, you know, I'm going to ask you this question. Is happiness actually even possible?
Happiness is not a fleeting state. It's not that you're just in sort of, you know, a good mood all the time. Happiness, in the sense that I'm talking about it, is really an ongoing frame of mind. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. It doesn't mean that you don't have a bad day every now and again. It doesn't mean you don't get angry. What it means is you can frame everything in terms of what's possible and what you have control over, or at least influence over, and what you learn from every situation.
Some, you know, experts out there will say that it is just this sort of state of mind where we're happy only for a short period of time. That is maybe a feeling or an emotion, and that's really not possible to remain in that state forever.
No, well, absolutely not possible to remain in that state constantly. Mm-hmm. But I think it is possible for it to be your core state forever. I think the scientists who are working in positive psychology would say that it's about thriving and flourishing. And so if you are thriving, it means that you're making the most of all the opportunities that you have and working in alignment with your own personal strengths. The more you're working with your strengths, the more likely you are to be happy and fulfilled with whatever it is you're up to.
And which makes actually a whole lot of sense, mm-hmm. doesn't it? It's like knowing your values, your top values.
Absolutely.
Your core values as a human being.
Yes.
And, you know, the more you spend time thinking about, acting on whatever your top value is, it makes sense that you would feel, you know, fulfilled or mm-hmm. joy. There are many people who choose to use the word joy instead of happiness.
Yes. Yeah.
In a way, to me, they seem the same thing, but others don't agree.
Yeah, and however you define it personally, it's really about creating the state within which you can thrive and flourish. And by the same token, that means that when you understand that there's something not working in your life, to address it and to take steps to deal with it and to do what you can to minimize its influence in your life.
And how would you actually define success?
Success is entirely individually defined, so my definition won't be the same as anyone else's. There are also studies to prove that happiness must occur before success. So I like to think of my own executive coaching work as having kind of a stealth agenda, in that I will be brought into organizations in order to help their people be successful. What I discovered, though, is that they can't possibly be successful if they're not happy. And so we need to dig into what it is that can make them happy and work on that as the foundation on which they can build success.
So is it possible then to have a thriving corporation when you have all your staff unhappy?
Absolutely not.
So what's the first step? What do you do?
Oh my gosh, I wish it were that easy. I really do. There are those who would say you must start at the top, and I'm not convinced that's true, because I think people in the middle of an organization can make a difference. And I had a conversation with a woman just this morning when we were talking about how she can create difference with her team, and the influence that will then have a ripple effect inside her organization. So it might take a long time, but I think it really is possible to create change from the inside out.
And is it mostly changing thoughts to then change behavior? Is that how you would approach it?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I believe there are people who would say you could do it from either direction and it still works. But I hesitate to dive too deeply into that because I'm really not qualified. But I do know that how we process situations hugely impacts how we react and how we behave going forward. And so if I can look at things as a learning opportunity, if I can ask myself what I'm meant to discover about myself from a situation, that might help me process something differently than if I'm just reacting or believing that the other person is wrong if there's been a disagreement, something like that.
So then organizations would be wise then to hire an executive coach to increase their productivity by helping to make their employees or staff and contractors happy and fulfilled.
Well, I'd love to think executive coaching was the answer to everything, but it's just not. So there are companies that are legendary in terms of the things that they do to help their employees enjoy being at work. And so Google has, I think their cafeteria has gourmet meals and people's individual requests on the menu and scooters in the hallway, and any workplace that addresses things like on-site fitness and childcare. They're all contributing to improving some of the things or to offering some of the things that can make people feel better about being at work. There's a great book out now called Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, who founded Zappos. And he talks a lot about community and tribe and the importance that most people place on being part of something, part of a community where they work. All of these things contribute to happiness.
So is it the human experience or human condition to want to be part of something bigger?
Definitely. And there are two kinds of part of something that I think are important. So one is part of a community of people. Because while we don't need to have our social system necessarily be the one we have at work, it is important to have a group of people that we enjoy being with at work. And in fact, it's also important, and the Gallup organization a few years ago brought out the idea of having a BFF at work. It's important that everyone... A BFF, a best friend.
Oh, okay.
It's important that everyone have at least one person they think they can talk to and trust at work. So there's that kind of community, it's the people community, but then there's the being part of something that they believe in. So everyone needs to have purpose. And we are going to be thriving in our work if we believe that our work is important in the world, at least in terms that work for us.
Now, something I did see on your website was a large percentage of new executives fail within the first 18 months of entering a new position. A staggering large percentage. Why?
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of different stats on that, everywhere from 18 to high 40s or 50s even %. But
what's going on?
Well, sometimes it's lack of preparedness. So oftentimes an organization will do a great job of orienting in terms of the policies and procedures and sort of the nuts and bolts, but less so in terms of culture. Oftentimes people will make job decisions because they're running away from something that was a problem as opposed to choosing intentionally the thing that they go towards. Sometimes the situation as sold, as presented to a new candidate isn't quite what the reality is when you get inside, and so there's due diligence required on everybody's part. And one of the things that we do as executive coaches with new executives is to give them a safe space to process some of their anxiety and frustration and some of the questions in the early days.
What sort of trends have you seen with female executives in corporations through your coaching? Have you seen anything interesting? I mean, you've seen, other than the accidental alpha trend, but is there anything else within that environment that you see for female executives?
I think women in general, and a very broad generalization, but I think women in general are stepping into their own a little more comfortably around characteristics and attributes into their leadership style, dressing with a little more personality and ease and comfort, understanding how to be assertive without being criticized for being overly so in all the wrong ways. I'm finding it a little easier to find female role models for some of the younger women to look up to. So I think there are very, very, very good things happening.
I remember working for an organization many years ago that made it mandatory that women had to wear pantyhose when they were wearing dresses. It was mandatory.
Yes, well, in my very first job, I worked for an organization that said that separates, jackets and skirts, were not okay. The suits were really what you had to wear, and no open-toed shoes, and all these horrifying things that were all part of that sort of 80s model of dress for success. And thankfully, we've transcended that by a good margin. And every dress code is environment specific. So what's going to work in an advertising agency isn't going to work in a bank. So you have to be really important. It's really important to be contextual, to be look around and see what's right in your own environment.
And so have companies, in terms of dress and how you feel and empowerment, I mean, have companies moved toward, are you seeing a larger trend moving toward casual clothes, especially with women, or still more very business attire, or does it just really vary?
Really varies. There are no rules anymore, I don't think. Again, environment dictates, and I think women have to be, I think, a little more careful and thoughtful about what we wear, just because the uniform for men is a little bit more clearly defined. It's not quite so easily defined for us. But in all cases, I will always coach women to pay attention to the details and to always look polished and, to present themselves with some thought.
And so in terms of your executive coaching business then, Parachute Executive Coaching,
Yes,
that's what it's called?
That's right.
If our viewers would like more information, where would they find you on the internet?
www.parachuteexecutivecoaching.com.
Fantastic. So for you, what's next for you?
Oh my gosh,
your career?
I've got a fantastic burst of creative energy going at the moment. Parachute is thriving, I'm happy to say. We've got a team of associates across the country and everyone's staying very, very busy. So we're working inside a large number of companies, and I have the Accidental Alpha Project, and I'm working on a number of other things as well. There's a small corner of my practice is personal coaching, and it's generally the what's next for the person who's kind of peaked in their corporate career and wants to think about something that looks more like significance than success. And so I'm creating the process and the model and the materials and so on for that, to formalize the work that I do in that area. So that's kind of exciting. So lots going on.
That's fantastic. And we're almost out of time, but one thing I did want to say is that, just to emphasize that, of course, the Accidental Alpha community is not just for wives and breadwinner wives, but it's also for single women who are self-sufficient, who maybe don't want to be single women that are self-sufficient.
Well, that was actually brought up to me by a friend of mine who said exactly that. Well, hang on, this whole Accidental Alpha thing might also be for someone for whom, and I think there's a book in the States, it's called Prince Charming Isn't Coming.
Prince Charming Isn't Coming.
Yeah. And so for the woman who had always envisioned that their life would be a partnership, it is getting to a point where they think, well, what if it isn't? I guess I need to be ready to handle that. And that's a surprise. So that's another version of the Accidental Alpha.
And again, the URL is accidentalalpha.com.
Correct.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's been a great half hour. So thank you, and I hope you come back again.
Oh, I'd love to.
We'll pick up where we left off.
Great.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about how Feng Shui can improve your relationship with expert Tila Silverio. See you soon.